Thank you everyone for joining early. We were overly cautious given the events of the last lecture, but we're really excited to have invited Carlos Moran to speak with us today, who is the Watershed Coordinator at the Council for Watershed Health. And as you know, or most of you know, this is part of our spring lecture series at the Center for Urban Resilience. So I am Dr. Michelle Romolini. I'm the Managing Director of the Center for Urban Resilience. And 5 years ago, we started this lecture series really to bring together the sort of separate departments of the university and the different parts of the sciences and the liberal arts that impact the environmental issues that we're facing today. So all of these complex problems really require these interdisciplinary teams to address them. And we kind of saw a need to bring in speakers, both some from inside the university, some from outside the university, that could talk about different ways of addressing complex challenges. And so your course, and also the theme of the lecture series this spring, is Imagining the Resilient City: How Urban Ecology Helps to Shape Just, Verdant, and Sustainable Urban Communities. And Carlos is our second speaker. We'll have one more speaker this spring. And so I'm going to introduce Carlos, and he's going to give his title of his talk. But so we invited Carlos. He has a master's degree in social work, and his experience includes designing and implementing high impact strategies that intersect mental health, public health, and environmental justice. He regularly engages diverse ranges of communities to advance place-based solutions that drive large-scale multi-benefit investments in Los Angeles's most economically, environmentally, and health-stressed communities. Carlos also serves as adjunct faculty in the USC School of Social Work, where he teaches graduate courses in policy, research, and program evaluation and human behavior. And we at Cures have had the great fortune to work with Carlos on tree canopy planning projects, LA River watershed projects, and other work. So we're so excited to have you here, Carlos, and I will turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Eric, for having me here. Good morning, class. Tuesday, huh? We're in April. When are y'all in quarter system or semester? Semester. Okay. So I'm in the same boat as y'all. At USC, we're on the semester system, and so we're like in unit 12. I'll be heading over there a little bit later today. So it's good to be here. Good to see some new faces, new student faces. I've been stuck with the same classes for the last 12 weeks, as I mentioned. So it's good to see new ones here. I'm going to be focusing in on a couple of three things. And I'll share my screen in a bit, but the whole theme is around environmental justice. So I'll share with you, I'll start by framing everything around intersectionality, and then I'll go into kind of giving you a landscape analysis, or kind of orienting you to climate infrastructure and funding that is available. From there, I'm going to move it on into the program that I'm going to spend most of the time in, which is Redesign LA. And as I describe that program and give you an overview of it, I'll also share some examples of the outcomes of that program. But throughout, I'm going to be sharing the screen. Feel free to post in some comments or questions in the chat. Feel free to also just unmute yourself and ask a question, because when I'm sharing on Zoom, I can't always see everyone's faces or the chats coming in. So just feel free to unmute yourself, and I'm happy to just pause and answer as needed. But I also know that we'll have a time for discussion at the end. Try to do this here. So a little bit about myself. So I'm a social worker. my undergrad is in Chicano Studies, Child and Adolescent Development and Psychology. And I started off just always having like a social justice focus to just growing up. That was just part of my thing. And I went to get my master's without thinking that I was on that track, but I ended up with the master's in social work. And the reason for that is because it really called, to do, it provides the tools to do social justice work. And I knew that, okay, if I'm going to do this work, I can't just be volunteering all the time. Like, I got to get paid for it. I got to make money. I got to sustain myself, sustain a family, So social work kind of was that happy medium for me. And with social work, most people think that it's about foster care and foster youth and, working within that child care and child family system. But it really goes beyond that. And it goes, it's a very broad discipline where we look at central focus of it in our birth within the field is around justice. So we do work on policy, research, anything that impacts people is kind of where we're in. Most social workers that you may come across are probably therapists, right? There's a big track for clinical work. So my track, when I graduated, I was working with those who were unhoused. Way back in 2008, there was 2007, 2008, there was a big recession. A lot of people were entering homelessness or at risk of losing their homes. And so my job was to create this program and create a program that would create a safety net for them. So those, there was teachers, there was construction workers, there was bankers, there was people that were just at risk of losing everything. So my job was to make sure that they that we provided services so that they wouldn't end up on the streets, that they would keep their mortgages, that they would keep their homes, they would not get evicted, and essentially stabilize them. From there, I moved on and I worked around other neighborhood redevelopment projects. For example, there was an abandoned bread factory in South LA. And I'm sharing this little bit of background because it relates on where I'm at today and doing climate change. So I was, there was an abandoned Weber bread factory, and my job was, it was pretty awesome. It was like, hey, we have this full-blown factory that's been abandoned in South Los Angeles for the past 20 something years. And it was like a blank canvas, like, let's do something here. In South Los Angeles, there's, just unfortunately, everything that, any sort of data point will point that, like, this is the highest need area, the most under-resourced, the most, economically, academically, physical health, public health, mental health, substance abuse, everything you name it was going on here, and it was at its worst. So what I did is I brought a collaborative together, and we transformed this bread factory into a multi-service center. It's a hub now that started with 12 people. I brought in our 12 therapists and case managers to provide mental health services to children and families. And then from there, expanded it to about 180 different staff that were providing everything from, we had a school on site, we had a health clinic on site, services for those who were unhoused. We had the only trauma center in Southern California for those who had experienced some sort of violence, helping them navigate through different services, whether it was the systems, the court system, but also the mental health system. So it was this comprehensive approach to addressing the community needs there, the multiple needs, and addressing the multiple benefits. Now, fast forward to, a few years later, we were serving like 3,000 people a year, like within 3 years. That's how much of a need there was. I had no idea what green infrastructure, climate resiliency, sustainability was. No idea, right? My focus and our collaborative's focus was, hey, there's needs that need to be met. There's basic needs, there's health needs, there's mental health needs, there's housing needs. All of these things need to be met. And we were addressing them with urgency. And we knew that there was no trees in the area. We knew there was a concrete jungle. We knew that when summer would hit, that we would see an increase in mental health symptoms, in violence, in folks not coming to seek services, in students not going to school, and just an overall decline. We experienced that, right? But we didn't really make the connection to climate. And it wasn't until I got introduced to my previous employer, True People, where I started to make those connections. And so, boom, now, like, my job is, like, my mission is to be that bridge between, like, my network of people that I knew that are working in that social service space with now the network that I have within the environmental space, and to be that bridge and to be that connector in communities that need it the most, because I know there's a lot of resources from both sides, from the social service end and public health end, and especially from the infrastructure, and they don't communicate. So my job is to really try to come up with interventions, come up with projects that marry the both and that provide this holistic approach to multi-benefits, true multi-benefit solutions. So that brings us to Redesign LA. All right. So at the Council for Watershed Health, where I'm currently working, we have this program, and we just branded it Redesign LA. It's you know, something we just came up with. But what we're doing here is I bring in my justice approach, and whether it's social justice or environmental justice, it's justice, right? So I bring in that approach, and we work with a cohort. We call them cohort, but we work with a group of community-based organizations that are experts in their field and their needs. Similar, like my organization, we could have been part of Redesign LA back in the day when we did this project. So it's focusing in on those that don't necessarily have experience in the environmental space, specifically around water. But they have, you know, a lot of expertise and a lot of knowledge in their own right. Here, the logos at the bottom, I'll speak a little bit more about them later on, but this is the program that I'll be focusing on. As I move into that, kind of, I take intersectionality as kind of the foundation for a lot of my work. Intersectionality is a foundational, it's a cornerstone for our profession at social work. And so I kind of bring it into this space as well. So intersectionality is really looking at, and it's a term that's more and more common now, but it's looking at an individual, right? Specifically, and looking up at the multiple identities that make up that individual. And from there, those multiple identities, those multiple intersectional identities or things that a person identifies with, that makes up who they are. It makes me who I am. It's the cumulative experience of my identities who bring me to life. Well, I bring that approach into our field of, into this space of sustainability, environmental justice. And when we look at individuals, right, individuals that I've been working with for all of my career, there's needs, you know, there's food, you know, lack of food in certain places. In South LA, there's food deserts. There's a lack of safe, clean water to drink, and then also stormwater, contaminated water that's moving through neighborhoods. There's public health issues, there's economic disparities, right? Educational disparities, everything from pre-K all the way to 12th grade and beyond. Climate change obviously is an issue, lack of green space, lack of access to natural spaces, mental health problems, incarceration, and the rate of fathers specifically that are going into the prison systems, the trauma that's experiencing, houselessness, all of these things, right? In communities that are the most affected by climate change, they're not just affected by hotter days and poor air quality, and most impacted by droughts. Like, there's a multitude of issues that are at play in these communities, and that individuals experience. Now, if an individual experiences all of these, right, and then boom, you add climate as kind of an overlay. Now multiply that by millions of people, right? And now you have a whole community, a whole part of the city, a whole part of an urban environment that is collectively experiencing these intersectional issues. And that leads us to inequality, right? Inequities. And it leads us to like this intersectional approach and perspective. Lets us know that inequity is cumulative. It's not just that, oh, I don't have access to healthcare, or less access to healthcare than someone else, or less access to green space than someone else. No, it's not just about one isolated inequity, but it's a cumulative experience. So that lens really kind of focuses my perspective when working on an environmental justice, on planning, on working with communities who already know what issues they're dealing with, and then it's now folding in a climate perspective, an infrastructure perspective, a sustainability, a resiliency perspective. And resiliency, I come from the mental health field, obviously, and I see resilient people all the time, right? People who've been able to bounce back from traumatic event after, trauma after trauma after trauma, and they are graduating high school, they're going to college, they're succeeding in their own ways, families that are staying together. And so my perspective on resiliency was always framed in that way. And then I got into the environmental space about 6 years ago or so, and it's like, oh, there's climate resiliency as well. And so I'm really kind of folding in those two and marrying the two and intersecting those two perspectives, that very micro, but also that very macro perspective on addressing, on seeing resiliency in a very holistic way. Okay, I'm gonna pause there and see, are we, I wanna gauge the temperature here. Are y'all doing okay? Any questions so far? Thumbs up. Cool, thanks Ashley, Anna, Claire.
Carlos, thank you so much also for including your personal journey, because my colleagues here are all students, and we've had these conversations in class every morning before we get going about the trajectory that we're on and the decisions we make and the opportunities before us. And so you're a great inspiration. Thank you for taking the time for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome, man. All right, so now let's get into the program. All right, gave you some context and background. So in 2014, the Council for Watershed Health, we do a lot of our focuses on research and just kind of learning from the interventions that we're engaging with. So back in 2014, there was this study, this outreach study that was done, and it was funded by the state. It's called Disadvantaged Community Outreach Evaluation Study. And it really set out to understand, like, what are people's perspective around stormwater and stormwater management, and basic level, like, do you even do to help us understand, like, do people even know what stormwater means, right? So it was very, very kind of basic. What we found out of that study was that there was a need and a desire to learn more about water, about stormwater. But people were just disconnected. Community groups were disconnected from the conversations, from even knowing where to go. During this evaluation study, for some of them, it was their very first time even hearing of the concepts around stormwater. and around, what this concrete channel, in their neighborhood even was or meant. So it was a very base introduction. That laid the foundation for the Council for Watershed Health to start Redesign LA. So what we found is like there's an appetite, there's a need. Communities are expressing, community and community-based organizations are expressing a need. And then there's also all of this funding, right? So when we're planning, when you go out there as planners, when you're working on sustainability, you really can't do much without resources. None of us can, right? We need funding. We need funding to be able to get projects off the ground, to take our ideas from ideas into action or to construction. So there is there's billions and billions of dollars that are available and that haven't always been available, but they are now. So there's state dollars, as you can see, Prop 1 and Prop 68 providing, almost $6 billion, which Prop 1 is about to end. LA County, in the last, maybe since 2017 or so, we've had these measures passed, right? So all of us who live in LA County, we are paying taxes, a small bit of a few cents for the area that we live, and it contributes to this pot of Measure W, Measure A, Measure M. These local dollars generate, as you can see here, how much they generate independently, but there are billions of dollars locally, state, and not even counting federal, right? And not even counting how much of a surplus we have in the state, these last couple of years. And so all of this funding around water, specifically around resiliency, we can tie water back to it. We can tie climate resiliency back to any of these. Measure M over here on the right-hand side is focused on transportation. But there is an ability, there is set-asides there where we can think about beyond just, transportation, think about sustainable, active streets and including sustainable measures there. Measure A is focused on parks. So there's about 97 million annually to create new parks, to acquire new land, to renovate existing parks, to create programming that improves access to green spaces, to natural spaces. So there, and all of that includes set aside money for climate resiliency. And Measure W is focused on water. I work specifically as my title, Watershed Coordinator, under this grant or this program. Now, with all of this money available, we are focusing Redesign LA on water and driving those investments on water. But most importantly, we see that the opportunity is not so much on the investments that are there, but the opportunity is to take those investments that focus in on water and really dive into multi-benefit projects that are community driven, that are community led, that are designed, envisioned, and executed by communities, that community members are at the driving seat. Specifically, community-based organizations are a driver in implementing projects. Nature-based solutions is another way that we see an opportunity to drive all of this investment and place it into these two buckets. So all of that to say is that the opportunity exists within community for community-based organizations to be part of these solutions. It's not so much about government or agencies and engineering firms kind of coming in, swooping up all the money to develop their own projects without community input. It's really including and inserting, making sure that we insert community-based organizations in that conversation at all levels of this. And I'll share a little bit more about what that means. So that intersectional approach, right? There's funding, and then there's benefits that funding can provide. That study allowed us to really hone in on water being a that water can be a focus and intersects with so many different community benefits. If we're talking about drinking water and someone, a community member or community organization is saying, hey, we don't have access to clean drinking water. It comes out brown. We don't have green space. We don't have safe places to walk to and from our schools, our children to schools or to work. Our schools are, they're just, our kids can't even go outside and recreate, health, we're experiencing high levels of diabetes, of asthma, of lead poisoning. We don't have enough housing, there's not enough jobs in our communities. There's not enough gardens and trails and places for us to recreate. We are spending too much on our utility bills. There's contaminated soils. There's trash everywhere. We don't have, there's a lot of traffic and not enough bike lanes, and we can't even, ride around our neighborhoods or get around in a safe manner. All of these are things that we hear from community members, from community-based organizations, and they have nothing. They never mention climate. They never mention water. They never, other than drinking water. They never mention these words that we're exposed to, right? These terms. Their focus is, my kids don't have a safe route. They don't have a safe place to go to and from school. It's too hot for them. We don't have enough jobs. We need more housing. There's too much, trash. Our fields are polluted. But they're coming from a very, oftentimes we hear that it's just coming from a very personal perspective, right? That intersectionality of all these different traumas that are being experienced. Boom. Okay, so now a group is focused on, let's say, education and child and family wellness, right? Community health, ensuring that they have access to doctors and appropriate resources for their asthma, that the students have the right support to achieve academically in schools, in the elementary schools. Now, our job through Redesign LA is to kind of take that perspective that they have in their expertise and train them so that they understand water as a component of their needs that they're trying to address, but also that there is funding available to meet their immediate needs through this water perspective. Okay, so here are the groups that we're currently working with in Redesign LA. We have, all the red is underserved communities. The state calls them, do y'all know what the state calls underserved communities? Eric, is this covered in DACs, covered in your class, DAC?
We've talked about it in general, but we haven't used the state moniker. So I'd love for you to share that. Cool.
All right. So the state, it's a good thing that they define. The state has a definition for communities that are overly burdened. The term that I use is the most economically and environmentally stressed communities. Right? These communities, the state calls them disadvantaged communities, DAC. And it's pretty much based on income and then a couple of other factors depending on the agency. But it's those communities that are the poorest, essentially, that are most disadvantaged. It's not a great term. The positive side of it is that the state designates funding specifically to be invested in these communities. So the red here are those what the state defines as disadvantaged communities, DAC. If you are going to work in the state of California, that's going to be a term that you're going to be hearing over and over. But the red is all these environmentally and economically stressed communities. And these are the partners that we work with now. This is Redesign LA right here. We started with 3 back in 2006 years ago. We started with KYCC, Koreatown Youth and Community Center, Day One, and Pacoima Beautiful. So we started with these 3, and we took that initial community study and then worked with them to really build, again, that capacity to understand the language around water. Since then, we've evolved. They've become mentors. We started a new group where they were the mentors to that new group. That group graduated, and now they're mentors to a new group. So all in all, we have 12 organizations now. And you'll see where they're working, everything from as far east as Pomona to working with the Tatavian Band of Mission Indians, California recognized tribe, up into Southeast LA with River in Action, East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice, and then Community Repower Movement in South Los Angeles. In Boyle Heights, East LA, we work with Promesa Boyle Heights, Asian Pacific Islander Forward Movement, Active SGV. So there's a good group here. And some of these are now water leaders themselves. So as a result, we like to think of our program is now they're decision makers. They're decision makers. They sit on committees. They sit on those. I shared that graph with the money bags. They're now members, voting members, or have a level of influence of how that money is spent. So this capacity building program elevates not just organizations and provide capacity for organizations, but provides capacity so that the folks working within those organizations can be at the forefront of at that driver's seat of community-based investments and interventions. Time. 3, okay. We're good.
Like halfway
right.
through.
Halfway through, okay. So we have, now I'm gonna get a little detailed, like on how the project works. So boom, we've established the needs. We've established an opportunity, right, where with the funding, the intersection between the funding for water and the community needs. I introduced you to who is part of that cohort now, who's part of Redesign LA, and this is how we do it. This is the jam that we work through, and it's just an overview of it, right? So this is how we engage in the environmental justice planning, the theme for today. First, we acknowledge who's at the center of everything. It's the community-based organizations. All 12 of those that you saw on that map, they focus in on engagement. They know their community the best. They know their needs the best. They know who to talk to, how to get people together. Engagement is key. So that's what they focus on. Where we come in as Council for Watershed Health, and as the mentors who have graduated, is we break up our work into 2 sections. The left-hand side is the planning, and then the right is the implementation. As folks start with us, we go through a phasing process, phase 1. So planning, it's all about just understanding each other, right? What's your mission? What projects do you have going on to fulfill your mission? They have nothing to do with climate resiliency, by the way. And from there, we start to really bring in that perspective of like, how can water relate back to this, right? In general terms. And then as we move through that, we begin to say, hey, you know, there's a grant for doing community engagement and wellness, but it's not coming from public health. It's coming from, you know, a different state agency. It could be like CAL FIRE or a Coastal Conservancy. And so we begin to start to look at that. Folks, when they start in this gathering of information, it's just general needs assessment. They continue to do their work. They will have maybe a fair that they do, a resource fair. And then all of a sudden, now they're trained in understanding water and climate change. They have a little bit of that language, and they start to engage their members and their communities in those discussions. That leads us to a needs assessment. So that education and needs assessment is the first thing that needs to be done. So we raise up the understanding for this organization, community-based organization, to talk about water, talk about climate. Now they're sharing it with others. And as they're sharing it with others, they're collecting information and they're intersecting their specific needs around, let's say, health and wellness. They're now marrying it with water and climate resiliency. It leads to this robust kind of community needs assessment that they hadn't seen and they haven't done before. So they execute that type of work, right? Engagement is always there. All right, cool. Then we loop down as part of this planning phase, and let's gather some more information, right? What can we do now that we know that, you know, families care about health, they care about wellness, they want their children healthy, they want now they're seeing that they understand the way water flows, and they understand that now there's pollutants that are running through their neighborhood when it rains. They're understanding that even when it doesn't rain and there's water flowing through the neighborhoods, like the type of pollutants that it can bring. They're understanding drought in a different way, water supply, air quality, like all of these different things, right? So they're understanding that and understanding how it impacts health, their children's health, their family's health, how it contributes to that. There's a connection that is now made between the lack of green space and lack of parks to diabetes. Now there's a connection to the lack of green space and the lack of parks to their lack of just not having feeling safe and walking their neighborhood, their educational attainments for their children. So they start to see all of this. They begin to plan together with us. We brainstorm, we come up with interventions, we come up with solutions to address their primary needs on children's health and wellness. And then boom, now marrying it with the climate related needs. There's park renovations that have come out of our projects. There's safe and active streets that have come out of this work. There's green alleys that's come out of this. So there's all these community-led interventions that are addressing all of their needs, plus, right? We go through that planning process, that designing process. Engagement, again, it rolls with them. Like that's what they do. That's what they're a big part of. And as you can see, very important is here at the bottom, you see these money signs. They need to get paid for it, right? They're experts. Remember, I kept mentioning they're experts in their communities, they're experts in their field. So when you have an expertise, you need to be appropriately compensated for that expertise. And we ensure that they are always compensated appropriately. And now we're not talking about stipends. Oftentimes, you know, when I've seen projects like this where it's like, oh, we'll provide a stipend to a CBO for doing community engagement or for hosting us or X, Y, and Z. When we engage them and we put them at the front seat or at a driver's seat of getting these projects done, we are fully committed to making sure that they get paid very similar rates to engineering firms and other experts that are at the table, landscape designers and architects. So it's valuing that expertise, because in the long run, it's going to save that project so much more money, and it's going to return the investment many folds if we truly get community buy-in and make sure that they're involved every step of the way. Oh, I see a chat here. Cool. So bam, that's planning, right? Do a education needs assessment, identify what are the needs, that the multiple needs, and then come up with solutions that address those multiple needs, multi-benefit solutions. And by the way, this is like multi-years. This never happens in like 1 year. Like this is ongoing work. We then community says, hey, we want to design, we want to renovate a park. Park has been it hasn't been taken care of. It's not a good place for our neighborhoods. Now that we understand, we've always wanted to take care of it and do something with it. But now that they know that there's money available to do park renovations, to do stormwater management within that park and in the neighborhood, that now they have a source, they have a solution to address the need, and they can be part of that. So we work with them to work with engineering firms, to work with technical experts to get these plans in place, get funding for it, and then move it in towards the implementation phase of securing millions of dollars, to renovate a park. Right now, we're doing one in Maywood, the Maywood Riverfront Park. That's going to cost us about $10 million or so. So it's working again with community-based organizations as the anchors to get that project renovated, move in, and then ultimately constructed. And through that, there's always engagement, right? There's always like this feedback loop of gathering information, data collection, engagement, and then executing that piece, that component of that plan. So now when we get to stewardship on the implementation side, this community is fully invested, right? They've been involved in this park project, in this alley project, in this Green Street project for multiple years now. And it's part of their programming now. So by the time it gets to the project being complete, that community has ownership of that project. They are going to take care of it, and they're going to be stewards. And that's a key part to climate resiliency. That's a key part to be able to bounce back from experienced and lived traumas, whether it's at an individual or community level. It's that maintenance, right? That ability to cope. So that's what the stewardship. If they've had all this training, and now it's not just with individuals, but it's within community-based organizations. It's part of their institution. It's part of who they are now. They're incorporating this climate perspective. They're going to be the best stewards for their communities. And they're the ones that are now going to be the water leaders that are serving on decision-making bodies, and that are going to have the community's best interest at hand when decisions are made about where to spend the money, how to spend it. Let's see, do I want to share this? Okay. So in the last, here where it shows is where Redesign LA started. It's just the timeline and the multiple efforts that are taking place throughout the county. As you move through your studies and just get into this field, you'll start to see that there are multiple efforts coming at you or in play, multiple plans of how to prepare the region for resiliency. So there's Measure A, water talks, lower and upper LA River master plans, the Safe Clean Water program, all these different efforts, the WAM program at the bottom, which is combining these multiple programs, dollars at a local level, and trying to have government align their resources. Measure W for water, Measure H for housing, Measure A for parks, and M for metro, which is transportation. So all of these are happening. And now our cohort, all of those groups that you saw on the map are getting plugged into these different efforts in one way or another, slowly but surely, right? It's an introduction, and then building a network, and then boom, all of a sudden, like now being part of scoring committees, decision-making governance bodies, or influencing certain plans, or being contracted to do community engagement to help some of these plans be developed. So this just goes to show that in a short amount of time, there's been an increased effort regionally and state, but more here focused regionally, to address climate resiliency in a different way than before. So Redesign LA, just so y'all know, we don't compete with these other efforts. What we try to do is we create a space for the community-based organizations that we work with to come together and kind of be part of these other efforts with our support. So if they go to a, let's say, a county sustainability plan, they're part of that process. We want to make sure that we support them as best as possible so that they understand what's happening, they know what's going on, they can ask the right questions, they can at least follow along and provide the appropriate input, right? We're not there to create a whole new job for them and additional work, but it's really to be all-encompassing for them ultimately to fulfill their mission. I feel like I'm throwing a lot at you. Get in the crash course. So here's a resource I'm going to share with you. Redesign LA. This is our website. In this website, you can use it for, I think it'll be valuable for you to use for any of your projects that you're working with. But this is kind of the website hub that we guide our Redesign LA partners through. And it has resources, it has different projects as examples, a lot of different maps. I think we gotta update it with the new Cures networking map that y'all came up with recently. Pretty awesome, by the way. So this is a hub where you can come in and you want like Water 101. There's videos, there's, you know, a series of resources there for just like Water 101. You want to look into grants, you want to look into the different types of projects and planning. Those resources are there for you as well. So this is kind of our hub for all of our work. That's the website right there, redesign.la. The bottom one, redesign.la.ip. If you wanna, 2014, remember I started with that report that was done, that community needs assessment. That second link, redesign.la/DACIP, is kind of the updated version of that. We just did about, we're part of a project team with Tree People and Stantec firm. And we engaged CBOs to do another needs assessment. So we had over like 3,000 surveys completed and really kind of focused in on what are the current needs that people are experiencing. And then from there, we've developed a series of ideas to help address those needs and hopefully get them funded. Okay, so now I want to share with you a couple examples, all right, of some projects that went through that feedback loop system, that were on that map, and so here's what's come out of it. Here's the results. So one of them that I'll highlight is Merced Avenue. Merced Avenue, Greenway. This is a green infrastructure project. So it started very simple with the community need, right? It's like, hey, there's the current condition. In the city of South Del Monte, there is this street that is traditionally or initially built as a corridor for industry. There was an industry and there was a connector street to between two freeways. And it was meant for diesel trucks to move through and carry goods and all of that through this street. Since then, the industry has collapsed. There's very little movement there as far as the goods being transported. But what it left the community with, this huge street that is an alternate street to freeways. And it literally is folks like speeding through there, like rushing and just going. It's so open that it's kind of like this highway. A lot of deaths happened. It was unsafe for the community to move around through there. So Active SGV in day one, they knew that this was an important corridor for the community to bicycle and to get to and from jobs and just to bike. But there was also a lot of deaths happening there. So through a series of community engagement events and tying in their specific needs about healthy mobility and addressing diabetes through walking and bicycling, they identified this street as one that can use some improvements through that planning phase. And it was, okay, how do we connect water back to it? And we did that by saying, okay, it's not just about creating bike paths and putting up stop signs, but it's about creating a green street, creating green infrastructure, capturing water, capturing flood water, capturing the pollutants that move through there, reducing the number of traffic lanes from 4 on each side to just 2 on each side. And then creating a safe, protected space for people to walk and bicycle and run, but also creating spaces for them to, spaces on the street to capture the stormwater and the pollutants that are moving through there. So that project is now funded, fully funded. It took 6 years to get this project going from like idea to moving it through different design phases and actually going to start groundbreaking right now. But this is a collaborative where the community-based organization Active SGV has worked with city government, with engineering firms, with design firms, to really lead the process of coming up with this green project. The Council for Watershed Health, for example, our role to redesign and lay on all this is to prepare Active SGV on their community engagement, to train them on what green infrastructure is, on the different types of strategies that they can use in a green street. And then when we were ready, and then bring in all the different partners, right? We know who the design firms are, we know who the engineering firms are, bring them together, help them, Active SGV garner political will and support. We bring the project team together, and we write the grants, like Council for Watershed Health. We write the grant. We wrote the grants for the cities and for Active SGV to help them move this forward. Here's another project. This one is in Southeast LA, and this one is Maywood Riverfront Park. And this started. There's the partners involved is East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice, Communities for a Better Environment, and LA Neighborhood Land Trust. there was actually two different efforts going on here. And so what we did is we were able to bring them all together. But Maywood Riverfront, also we're calling it the Sleepy Lagoon Memorial Project. It's it's one of the larger parks in all of Southeast LA. It is right next to the river. You can see the river right above the logos there of its current condition when you're looking at the park out into the river. But the parks it just needs major renovations. There's currently, when it was, this site was a former brownfield, means it was a contaminated site. And then now it is, then it was transformed into a park. But about over 10 years ago, when it was transformed into a park, there was really no thinking about stormwater elements, stormwater quality, although it was right next to the river. It's literally a riverfront park. So now our job is to really take in this community perspective, and communities for environmental, for better environment in East George. They held their own community engagement process, listening sessions, getting input. They brought in a Tongva cultural bearers to really understand, okay, what can we do in this space that is very holistic and addressing the multiple needs of the community. Sleepy Lagoon came about because a community, those who have lived there for generations, remember the Zoot Suit riots. And the Zoot Suit riots was a huge event that happened in the US, specifically here in LA, where right down the street from where this park is, there was was known as Sleepy Lagoon, and it's where Mexican and Mexican American youth would go, and that's where they would shower. It was like, not shower, have fun at the, like this, it was kind of yeah, it was like a lagoon, right? By Public Works that was put there. And so youth were segregated. They weren't allowed to go to the swimming pools, the public pools. So that's where they went. Anyway, someone got killed there. And then it launched the Zoot Suit riots, which I definitely just Google it, and it's a fascinating part of our history, and a traumatic part of our history, but definitely important. So in a way to memorialize that, there's going to be, this park is going to serve that. So it's going to integrate Tongva traditions and culture and memorial. It's going to memorialize Sleepy Lagoon as well. And now we're bringing in stormwater quality benefits into it, and look at ways that we can use that water, recycle it, or treat it, but improve the water quality, create enhanced green space, and address these needs that communities are having. And again, the drivers behind that are community-based organizations and the folks that they work with and represent. All right, I think that's it. Boom, I think I'm done. And you can reach out to me here at any time, Carlos at Watershed Health. If you're ever looking for an internship, we definitely do take interns as well. But yes, follow us. There's tons of good projects that we're working on. Thank y'all so much. I guess I'll turn it back to you, Eric, in class.
Carlos, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And you know, this is a course that tries to bring together the notion of the powers of science embedded in the cultural milieu of how people make decisions. And this has really been such a great culminating presentation, because we've talked back and forth throughout the semester between how the drivers of knowledge, like we gather through science, mathematics, and other forms of knowing, how does that actually help better the lives of people? And in healthy democracies, these are conversations. And we've talked about the basics of environmental justice, that local individuals should make decisions about their own communities. And to see you living this bridge and being an example of the incredibly important role that you can play, I think is very helpful. And I wonder if any of our folks have some questions. So our class actually goes to about 10 after 11. So if you have a couple of minutes, we have a couple of minutes here. If anyone has to leave, they can. But how about questions from our group?
I see Simret with her hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, so like environmental racism, it has like a lot of impacts on people's like health in a way that's like measurable. Um, does Redesign LA like keep track of those things like rates of asthma or like, I don't know, crime rates and stuff before and after like the implementation of these plans?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do, Simret, is on that that slide that had the loop, right? There's gathering information is part of that all along the way. So we start with, let's say a community group is looking at asthma rates, incarceration rates, all of those. That's already, a lot of times they already have that. And so what we begin to do is now work with them to help evaluate their impact and work with them so that they know how to do this beyond our efforts. So yes, so each individual project through the specific community-based organizations that's tied to that project, they already know how to do that, collect that information, their perspective. We help enhance it and broaden it so that they now look at it from an environmental, stormwater, climate resiliency perspective. And then they leave them with a plan so that they can track it over time. Yeah, because most of the time they already want to do that. Yeah, but very good question. We definitely, environmental racism is a real thing, right? And sometimes it's just labeling it and just saying, hey, you know, there's disparities in tree canopy and air quality, and that it translates to public health, you know, disparities. And that's environmental racism. And it was by design, you know, there was redlining happening. There was all these things that put it in place. All right. Others?
Simran has another question. Thank you.
Um, Do you ever have like any issues or like struggles like going into different communities kind of as like outside, not outsiders, but like as, well, I guess like a third party, like going in and trying to understand their needs without like overstepping and stuff?
Yeah, that's such a good one too. Like that is a struggle that folks have, right? And it's one that government has, that academic institutions have, that other community groups or nonprofits have, is and that is real because there is that lack of trust, right? So with Redesign LA, we always start and we lead with the existing community-based organization and experts. And so they're the ones that are really, when they're engaging with communities or there's community engagement, they're the ones that are doing it. It's not the council coming in and saying, hey, what do you need? And what are the issues that you all are experiencing? No, it's a trusted voice, right? And so in order to get that trusted voice, we just build relationships, right? We assess to see who's interested in being part of Redesign LA. And if they are, boom, then they get to be part of it, and then they execute all that. So it kind of eliminates that third party pushback.
I just wanted to make a comment about how much I appreciate your going through those loops, because the questions that were just asked and just understanding, you know, we face these problems as a university center where the challenges of going into a community as outsiders and the fact that you pointed out how important it is to compensate people for their labor and community organizations and acknowledge that their expertise is equally as important as the engineers on the project. And I really value that perspective, and I wanted to just emphasize it, repeat it, because I don't think that it's often acknowledged in funding proposals or calls when the government puts out they ask for funding proposals for a project, and there's often not a lot of funding allocated to this community engagement piece, which, like Carlos said, is just, it's essential to long-term resilience of a project. That community is making the decision on what they actually want for their own place and their own people. So I just wanted to echo that, emphasize that, like scream it from the hilltops that it's so important.
Yes, yes. Cool. I think we're good.
Actually, Carlos, I just want to say
Yes.
hi. I
Hey,
miss
Lisa.
you. We
I
miss you
know.
terribly. It's so good to see you again. I put a question in the chat. Michelle, I don't know if you want to recite it. I think it'll be valuable for the students.
You can ask it, Lisa.
Oh, okay. So Carlos, I serve on a subcommittee with CFAC, which is the Community Forestry Advisory Committee of LA. And what this group does is focuses on our tree canopy with the focus on saving water in our gardens, and this 3-year, actually a 20-year, 120-year drought, a 1,200-year drought, really, when you go way back in time, it's dramatically affecting our urban forest. And how is Redesign LA addressing the need for establishing new and improved existing tree canopy cover and balancing that with water needs and the coming restrictions that we're going to see?
Yes, good. That's important, because it's going to get worse, right? So as far as trees goes, we've supported the city of LA in the urban forestry management plans, revising their tree lists, generally, right? Boom, focusing on projects. Every project that we have has stormwater capture elements. And when we talk about stormwater capture, it's kind of a general term, but there's a thing as wet weather and dry weather, right? So there's wet when it rains and water's flowing. And then there's dry weather, which is like the millions of gallons of water that is wasted from sprinklers, from car washes, from people washing their driveways, and just water that just moves through the city. So you can also capture that water. So all of our projects will have a way to capture dry and wet weather to help any of the trees and the plants that are part of our green infrastructure. Interestingly, we are now working on a project. We're submitting a grant through the Transformative Climate Communities for South LA, where for what we're going to study is there's going to be thousands of trees that are going to be planted here. We're going to have a small percentage of them have curb cuts. So we cut the side of the curb so that water naturally flows into there, and we'll be able to water that tree without the need for residents having to go out there and water that tree that is in front of their driveways. So we're going to test that out and see how that works. So for future, it'll be a way to address the drought, the water needs.
Wonderful, thank you.
Cool.
Well,
Sean?
that just about wraps up our time for today, Carlos. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been wonderful.
You got it.
Thank
Pleasure to be
you.
here. Take care, y'all. Peace.